Hi, my name is Matt Rochelle, and this is my Cap 1 assignment, ATP Pathways. Move this around a little bit, each side. Big picture here, what we're trying to get at is what are the body's needs during physical activity? Basically what it comes down to is the length of the activity that we're doing. There are three systems when it comes to exercise that our body will utilize. First, if you look at the sprinter here, the first 10 seconds or so is the phosphocreatine system. It's only going to last about 10 seconds, and it's all out energy for a sprint or all out burst. After those initial 8 to 10 seconds, we're going to go into something called rapid glycolysis. This is more anaerobic type activities, and this can last up to 90 seconds. After about that 90 seconds, we're going to go into something called slow glycolysis, which can be several minutes long, and it will be until lactate removal rate is less than its production rate, and that's when we'll typically see fatigue. The smaller picture. How do we resynthesize ATP? Well, by breaking down the macronutrients that we eat, such as protein, fat, and carbohydrates. For carbohydrates, we have rapid and slow glycolysis. For fats, we break down glycerol and fatty acids. And then proteins, we remove the nitrogen and get deamination, which allows carbon skeleton byproducts to form ATP. When we talk about glucose metabolism, it nets 32 ATP, and ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and this is the makeup of ATP. Now, how do we get from a glucose molecule to ATP? There's a couple steps involved in this process. So, going from a glucose to a pyruvate will net us, this is basically called glycolysis, this will net us 2 ATP. And how that works is we really would get 4 ATP, but 2 are needed in the activation process to get the whole system rolling. When we go from glucose to 2-pyruvate, there are 2 NADHs formed, and they're going to go over to the electron transport chain as you see over here. Okay, each NADH is worth about 2.5 ATP, so that's why I have the 5 over here. So we have 5 ATP and 2 ATP from glycolysis. Now, we have 2-pyruvate. It's going to go down the chain to acetyl-CoA, and pyruvate is further oxidized until it becomes CO2. Electrons are picked up by NAD, and they form NADH. So, we have 2 more NADH over here. 2 times 2.5, we have another 5 ATP. Now we're at acetyl-CoA. Okay? Acetyl-CoA is going to go into something called the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. And off of this, during this whole cycle, we will have 2 more ATP formed by substrate phosphorylation, and we'll have 6 NADH come out of the Krebs cycle, and 2 FADH. FADH I haven't talked about yet. FADH is worth about 1.5 on average ATP. So if I move my screen up a little bit so we can see, we have 6 NADH going into the electron transport chain, and out comes 15 ATP. And we have 2 FADH2s, and that forms 3 ATP. So we have a total of 32 ATP. If you look over here at the electron transport chain, we have 5 plus 5 is 10, and then another 15 is 25, and then another 3 is 28. Over here we have glycolysis with netting 2 ATP, and then in the citric acid cycle we netted 2 more ATP from substrate phosphorylation, and it totals 32 ATP, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. Now, the next 2 slides, I'm basically just breaking this down a little bit more, so if I went a little too quick with the diagram. This is glycolysis netting 2 ATP. basically what happens is a glucose molecule has 6 carbons, and when it breaks down into two separate 3 carbon molecules. All right, and you can see right here that there's an NADH that's given off, which we talked about, and 2 ATP for each, so that's 4. But as you can see up here, we have 2 ATP going in, so we have to account for that. So it's 4 minus 2. We really only net 2 ATP. Okay. Now, for us to get into the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, 2 pyruvates go to 2 acetyl-CoA, like I talked about, forming 2 more NADH, which will be 5 ATP, which is going to be in here. And you can see that it says 30 or 32 ATP netting. That is because when the original 2 from glycolysis, 2 ATP, get transferred into the mitochondria, it depends on what type of enzyme they're getting transferred in by. If it's an FADH, it's only going to net 3 because the FADH2 is worth 1.5 on average ATP. If it goes in by the NADH, it'll be 5 because that's 2.5. Down here, it says more than 90% of ATP synthesis occurs in the electron transport chain, which is the 26 or 28. Okay. Now, this is us breaking down a triglycerol fatty or a fat, and this is how we're going to break it down into the ATP. So first we have a glycerol. Glycerol can actually transfer into something we call a pGal, and it degrades to pyruvate to form ATP through substrate phosphorylation. And we see down here glycerol and glycolysis getting into the citric acid cycle nets 19 ATP. Now our fatty acids, there's 3 of them to be exact. We have a 16 carbon chain of palmitic acid. This is going to have to get transferred down into beta oxidation. And what happens here is with a 16 carb chain, we need to get it into an acetyl-CoA. An acetyl-CoA has 2 carbons that make up its structure. So if you divide, I apologize, let me go back 1 slide. If you divide the 16 by 2, you're going to have 8 separate chains. And what happens is it's going to have to go into the beta oxidation cycle to get over here to break, as we break down each break it down into each acetyl-CoA. So what we're going to have is we're going to have 8 separate groups. All right, and what happens is it's going to go through the citric acid cycle 8 times, and through this cycle there's a net of 10 ATP each time. Okay, it's going to be 3 NADH, which will be 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5, which is 7.5. 1 FADH2, which would be 7.5 plus 1.5, and you get 9. And then each citric acid cycle nets 1 ATP, so you get 10. And since there's going to be 8 2-carbon structures going through this, you get 80. Okay, and beta oxidation is going to give us 28 ATP in the process because it's going to go through beta oxidation 7 times, and we're going to have an FADH2 come off of it and an NADH2 come off of it to equal 28. So now we're going to have, if you look down here, the 16 carbon fatty acid plus beta oxidation plus the citric acid cycle, we get 106 times 3, and we have 318. We add 19 to that, we have a net ATP of 337 for each fat molecule. This again is just going to break it down a little bit further, so if you couldn't really understand, sometimes I need to say it. We have an activation energy, so that's -2. The oxidation of the acetyl-CoA, which is the citric acid cycle, goes through 8 times. It nets 10 ATP each time, so that's 80. And then oxidation of FADH2 and oxidation of NADH2, which is going through the beta oxidation process, will give us 10.5 and 17.5 respectively, and we'll have 106 as a net. But there's 3 fatty acid chains, so we have to multiply that by 3. As you can see, like I said here, there's significantly more energy yield from a fat molecule than there is from a glucose, which only nets 32. Why this matters? People, particularly athletes, can train smarter to enhance their performance, and there's a better general understanding of the body, aerobic versus anaerobic type activities. Let me get this up here. Apologize about that. Soreness or muscle fatigue could be caused by lactate accumulation, and not to mention just that the human body is an incredible machine. Real-world implications. Both rapid and slow glycolysis are involved in many sports and activities. Rapid, we're going to use more of the fast twitch fibers, such as like a 200 or 400 meter run, gymnastics routines. The slow glycolysis or slow twitch fibers, longer distance, endurance type activities like a 5-mile run, 3-mile walk, 2,000 meter swim. By knowing how these processes work, it can help you adapt your training to an athlete to meet the demands of their specific sport. Implications for exercise. So back to the basics. I teach in my health and PE classes the FIT principle. As intensity is going to increase, the time that you can keep that intensity is going to decrease, and vice versa. So the higher intensity training, the book talks about starting at 55% of VO2 max for an untrained person. This is going to drive up blood lactate, and it could cause fatigue. If an endurance athlete can get to that steady state that we talk about, where there's a balance between lactate production and oxidation, aerobic metabolism can continue. The longer the workout activity, the more an athlete will break down fat because of depletion of their glycogen stores. And I have a nice little diagram over here that talks about the phosphagen system. So as time goes on, you're going to use it less and less. The anaerobic is blue. It's going to increase for a little bit of time, and then as that time goes past that 90 seconds to 2 minutes, it's going to decrease, and then our aerobic is going to increase as time goes on. Here's my references. I hope you enjoyed the slideshow. Look forward to hearing back from you.